Super Quickie. A fairly shameful time for free speech in the US was the Comics Code Authority, and the main guy to blame for that was Fredric Wertham. He was a psychiatrist and a soft racist, the kind that wanted to help blacks because they needed to be helped because they just weren't that bright. He didn't say it in those words, but his actions screamed it from the mountains. He claimed that the psychological damage from racial segregation meant that black children weren't to blame for juvenile delinquency. They just couldn't help being criminals. As a silver lining, these arguments did help justify overturning segregation in Brown v. Board of Education, but if you read his work behind the justifications, jeez. He used his position to target what he called crime comics, which included not only gangster comics, but also horror and superhero comics as well. He claimed that his research found that the content warped the fragile little minds of children and made them turn to crime. He pointed out that 90% of juvenile delinquents had read violent comics. He failed to point out that so did 90% of non-criminal juveniles. He also spent a disturbing amount of time looking for what he claimed were hidden sexual themes, like seeing the naked female form in tree bark, or claiming that Batman and Robin were gay lovers. His fellow psychiatrists thought he was a joke, but he found success with the public morals crowd, especially Senator Tğᴜᴍൡ, who brought him before his Senate subcommittee on juvenile delinquency. His claims resulted in comics being banned in many areas of the US and Canada, destroyed the entire subgenre of horror comics, and caused publishers, out of a very existential threat, to create the Comics Code Authority, which extremely limited the content of Silver Age comics. It wasn't just violence. They were prohibited by the code from negatively portraying authority figures and positively portraying civil disobedience. Comics creator Stan Lee said, "I hated the idea of what was happening with Wertham. I hated the fact that he was tarring every comic book with the same brush. But there was nothing we could do about it. We had to live through it." His arguments were patently sophistic, and there I'm being charitable, but he was a psychiatrist, so people listened. And a lot of his finding about children in comics, while presented as being race neutral, were based on observations of black children in his clinic distorted through the lens of his own bias. None of Wertham's claims stood up to scrutiny. Every time someone went beyond his very limited and biased research, they found his findings just didn't hold water. This was especially true after his death, when his papers were made available by the Library of Congress, and researchers found that he engaged in selective editing, gave spurious attributions to his sources, and completely failed to consider confounding factors. He had also manipulated his accounts from adolescence by cutting out some passages entirely and completely rephrasing others. A 2012 study found Wertham manipulated, overstated, compromised, and fabricated evidence, especially that evidence he attributed to personal clinical research with young people for rhetorical gain. The papers also show that he was gearing up for a similar attack on children's television. Sadly, Wertham's not alone. Every time some moron talks about how this or that is causing kids to be violent or whatever, it's this same kind of crap. Don't fall for it.